Welcome back to another amazing episode of Krusty Car News, and after Christmas, hope you have a wonderful break, and on top of it, now in a few days, we're looking at rolling over the calendar into 2025, and the new year promises to be an absolutely ballistic car year. I want to share 5 of the most interesting stories that we had for 2024. I want to summarize it, break it down, give you my thoughts and the highlights. The first story is Stellantis is crumbling. What's going on? We want to talk about the year in Stellantis land. The second story, massive insurance cost increases. The third story, Volkswagen may be going back to horse and buggy. The fourth story, things were bleak for Nissan, but they might have been pulled out of the fire. And the fifth story, we want to talk about the future of car pricing and where it looks to be trending. Be sure to sit down, grab your favorite snack, chill out, relax, and watch these 5 stories. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. So the first story, Stellantis is crumbling, and 2024 was an extremely struggling year for Stellantis. I mean, when we saw Carlos Tavares, the new CEO, take over, there was promises that he was going to help transition Stellantis and their entirety into the electric vehicle segment. But the struggles were real. As they start to advance very aggressively into electric vehicles, a lot of customers in the manufacturing of a lot of the North American products, the Jeep, Dodge, Ram products, and the Chrysler manufactured vehicles were left out to dry. A lot of customers felt that those vehicles weren't properly supported. Prices were escalated, and in the meantime, to try to make costs and double down, Stellantis was jacking their prices up far more than many of the competitors. And what we saw were now Jeeps that were going up 40, 50, 60% overall year over year over the last 5 years. We even saw Dodge products, eliminating some of their cars. The Challengers, the Chargers are going away, the 300 is disappearing, and all that really left was a couple of small SUVs that nobody really wanted. Unfortunately, even Chrysler, all they had was a minivan, and Jeep was just simply priced too high. They're trying to cater to a luxury car segment. In all of this wisdom, they struggle with the UAW negotiation, and sadly, a lot of retraction allegedly was happening. A lot of what Stellantis was doing wasn't aligned with the contracts, allegedly, and that left a lot to be desired. And there was all kinds of mudslinging between the CEO of Stellantis and UAW. They couldn't keep their people happy on the internal side. But on top of it, vehicles were sliding at an alarming rate. They could not sell a lot of their vehicles. Nobody was buying the Jeeps, the Dodge, the Rams, and they were highly incentivized throughout the year. Progress? No, there was none. Vehicles just were not selling for Stellantis. Incentives had to come in by the boatload just to move anything. And they were one of the worst selling manufacturers on the planet. As a result, a lot of pressure came down on the CEO. All eyes were on the CEO to do something different. Italy, plants were closing. There was plants closing here in North America. And the entire organization of Stellantis was up in arms and potentially in the line of fire for disappearing. There was talks about Chrysler getting sold off to a grandson of the originator, and all kinds of discussions about possibly parting out the brand, selling all kinds of the different components of Stellantis to different owners because they weren't going to potentially sell products the way they were. Stellantis were struggling. It was a tough year. Sales were down drastically. And up until recently, where finally the board members very politely asked the CEO to walk. He did that. And now we saw Tim Knuskis come back out of his retirement to now take over the helm for Dodge and potentially Ram, and hopefully turn this sinking ship around so it can get back to port on time before it goes completely underwater. The year has been absolutely upside down for Stellantis, and dealerships could not simply unload a lot of the product. Things were looking bleak, and they still look bleak. They're still one of the poorest sellers on the entire industry. Things are on the up and up with the change of the guard, the change of the CEO, a restructuring, strong aggressive incentives. Now they're starting to move a little bit of product. Rams are starting to sell a little bit, and Jeeps are so aggressively incentivized that they're starting to move some of the product, albeit not all of it. Even though they've incrementally increased some of their prices on their Jeeps again for 2025, it still makes a person wonder, what were they thinking? Stellantis, the struggles are real. And with all these massive price increases that ranged anywhere from 40 to 60% in the last 5 years, that leaves a lot of customers isolated. The kind of customers like you and I, Lunchbox Joe, that would potentially buy these types of vehicles. The middle class. And sadly, until some drastic changes come down, the pipe for a lot of people. People just aren't going to buy this. With the cost of living crisis impacting everybody, Stellantis is taking the approach of more is less and less is more, and people just aren't having it. So unless they're able to take a relook at this, improve reliability, and decrease the pricing, Stellantis looks like they're on a trajectory to a downhill slide into the abyss. The second story was all about rising insurance prices. What's going on? Well, I'll tell you what's happening. I mean, insurance companies are always trying to recuperate. They're always trying to charge more. Every single year, it doesn't seem to matter. Whether you have a good record, you have a clean record, no speeding tickets, no claims, and yet your prices continually rise. I've always said you've got to shop around, and your loyalty begins and ends with you. Forget about these companies, they're never loyal to the customer base. But there is an actual underlying reason why a lot of these insurance prices are rising. A lot of it has to do with false claims. People are faking injuries. People are staging accidents. People are making claims that are bogus. On top of it, thefts of vehicles are rising at an alarming rate. We're seeing a 380% increase in claims for stolen vehicles. Yes, in the last 5 years, things have gotten out of control. What we're finding now is the ports on East Coast are hotspot. What you're finding in Canada, the United States, where a lot of these thieves are stealing vehicles, stealing them from driveways, stealing them from car parks, stealing them from garages, and unfortunately a lot of these vehicles now that actually have key fobs that are easy to detect and read, all you have to do is have this by your front door and thieves are able to pick up the signal and drive the vehicle away. It's very easy these days unless you have a Faraday's cage or park your key fob far away. Would-be thieves are now figuring out, look, we're going to take these vehicles, rush them to port, either strip them down or send them overseas. We're now finding a lot of these vehicles south of the border, east of the border, overseas, still in some cases with the original license plate and a Tim Hortons coffee mug in the dash. You know, the police forces are overtaxed, and unfortunately a lot of what we're seeing now is a result of opportunistic. A lot of these thieves are finding out ways to steal these vehicles. It's a lot easier than it's ever been, and they've got their ways to get it overseas. It's a very lucrative business. Unfortunately, that leaves the insurance companies in a lurch, and sadly those losses pass down to you as the customer as a flow-through charge, and that's a big reason why insurance costs have been rising in these last couple of years. The third story is Volkswagen is back to the horse and buggy, or at least they may be. See, they're going through some serious struggles right now. You know, like a lot of the European manufacturers, VAG Group, one of the largest in Europe, Volkswagen Audi Group, also owner of Porsche and Skoda and a whole barrage of other vehicles like Lamborghini, are in a serious world of hurt. A lot of these manufacturers now just aren't selling the vehicles that they wanted to or hoped to, and again, this all boils down to the cost of living crisis, the cost of these vehicles. But unfortunately, Volkswagen has been advancing too quickly into the EV market space, and that, many say, is the key reason why Volkswagen is not doing very well. So much, in fact, though, energy prices are going up. There was all kinds of problems with acquiring the power and the energy to operate these facilities. Obviously, traditionally, we're getting power now from the Russian grid, where once we could potentially had received extra LNG from Canada or other markets to help feed Europe. Unfortunately, now with those interruptions and what was going on there in Eastern Europe, now we're seeing other challenges. But that's only part of the issue. The biggest issue is the fact that a lot of people are just not buying a lot of these electric vehicles. And on top of it, sales are down, prices are up. You have a lot of the workers striking at Volkswagen saying, no, we're not taking pay cuts. No, we're not altering our work schedules. All because the top players at the Volkswagen Audi Group are asking a lot of everybody, including the frontline workers, to be part of the team, to take it for the team. In other words, take pay cuts and be willing to absorb some of the struggles that the company and organization's going through. But unfortunately for the leaders of Volkswagen, the unions are very strong in Europe. You know, they're looking at closing plants, and some of the plants have already closed, and tens of thousands of workers are walking off the job. This is a serious level of chaos, and Volkswagen has never seen this level. But things are indeed in a spiraling downward direction and trajectory. Sales are in the toilet. We're seeing stock prices in the toilet. And unfortunately, unless something drastic changes, things aren't looking good. The ultimate real reason for a lot of this conundrum is the Chinese EV market. And no different from Volkswagen to Audi to any of the other manufacturers like BMW, Mercedes, and we're even seeing it with Nissan. where their footprint in China is struggling because a lot of the localized Chinese market now is choosing to buy the lower cost, predictable electric vehicles that Chinese manufacturers are making. That's pushing a lot of these European and Japanese marketers outside of that marketplace. They're losing market share. Volkswagen is no different. So putting more market share and more investments into the electric vehicle space, when those are the specific vehicles that nobody wants, that puts them in a real world of hurt. The entire year of 2024 has been an absolutely catastrophic year for Volkswagen and the Volkswagen Audi group as a whole. Time will tell what 2025 holds up, but things are looking very bleak, and you keep your eyes open for what's in store in this upcoming year. The fourth story is all about Nissan and all the struggles they've been witnessing as well. Sadly, it's not just Volkswagen, it's not just Stellantis. Nissan's one of the other big three losers that we've seen this year. And unfortunately, with this constant decline in sales, as a matter of fact, we saw in the first half of 2024, they've put out 99% of their profits gone, up in smoke, largely because poor sales, high incentives that they've been pushing out to the vendors and all of the dealers to try to sell these products, and all of the marketing attempts to get people to buy. The problem is the innovative products or non-innovative products. That's the sad part. Their products are getting stale, old, lacking innovation, and it doesn't help that they've got quality challenges, all kinds of recalls. With the CVT transmissions, we know it has a reputation now that is starting to really have an impact. People are steering away from the brand. You know, we've got variable compression engines, turbocharging, very high levels of reliability, not included with that car as part of the process. You know, people now are looking at, Mazda's an up-and-comer. Toyota's always had a strong reputation. Honda's had a solid reputation. Where does that leave Nissan? Nissan used to be one of the big players from Japan, but they've pretty much lost all of that effort. The quality is not there. The interest level of the product is not there. Marketing, too much money thrown there, and clearly now this year, we're seeing the CEO definitely take a pay cut, 50%. And the CFO said, the heck with this, I'm out. So the company is struggling. But as the year went on, they realized that Renault, as part of the key investors, has essentially backing out, reducing the amount of investment that they've been putting in. So clearly Nissan has been struggling, looking for some major investors to try to pull them out of the fire. Well, some rumors started here in the latter half of 2024 that Honda might in fact be that investor. I mean, with the ultimate competition in China, with the pure EVs in China, every manufacturer in North America and Japan are looking for efforts to try to improve their market share and their competitiveness. But now the latest word is Honda is allegedly looking at talks and negotiations and creating some sort of a common investment firm or collaboration that brings Honda dollars, investment dollars, brings Nissan in, Renault, and possibly Mitsubishi, all to collaborate to try to enhance and produce some affordable electric vehicles. And they all have to start pooling their resources to try to move forward and be competitive in this transitioning market of electric vehicles and try to be competitive with the Chinese market, because it's a matter of time before the BYDs and the entire arsenal and army of Chinese vehicles come into North America. It's just a matter of time. And these manufacturers are trying to get their act together before it's too late. Could Honda be the savior? Could Honda be the manufacturer that pulls Nissan out of the proverbial fire? Time will tell. We'll see. 2025 is heating up. And the fifth story has to do with the future of the car pricing. You know, we saw prices rise in 2021, 22. We start to see them climb with shortages of chips, shortages of vehicles, and prices continue to drive. You know, it's the supply and demand, where a lot of the shortages created this urgency and people had the money, but people had no inventory to buy because of the shortages. So manufacturers started to get on. They started to realize, you know what, if we build a more expensive vehicle and we ration those chips and put those in those vehicles rather than the cost baseline vehicles, we can make more money on each transaction. We don't have to sell as many vehicles and we can make more money. And every manufacturer start to catch on to that process and that business model. But things have been backfiring recently because sales are down. The big bulky SUVs, the big fully loaded trucks have all been seeing steady declines in sales. Whereas now Ford, even for example, is seeing opportunities. Come out with the little Maverick to try to fill in those gaps where people need a truck, but they couldn't afford a full-size F-150. They're also talking about coming up with a smaller, more cost-effective battery electric vehicle because to move a big heavy F-150 Lightning down the road means it needs a lot of battery, it needs a lot of electric motor. So maybe it needs a smaller battery or a smaller motor if you create a smaller vehicle. Ford's been exercising that operation and starting to think about, hey, the future is bright and maybe we can create something that's more interesting and more affordable for the customers to get people back in the door. But what's going to ultimately impact these prices? Are we going to see big price changes for 2024 and 25? Well, the long answer is no, and the short answer is no. Sadly, while we're starting to see some incentives, the end of 24, this is more typical for a cyclical side time of the market. We're seeing typically prices do drop at the end of the year, where manufacturers are moving in their new inventory and their old inventory becomes stale, lot rot, and they're just trying to move it out. That's why we're seeing some incentives. That's why we're seeing some of these vehicle prices are down. And there's some good deals to be had. There actually are. But this isn't chronic. I mean, look around. We're seeing Toyota for 2025. Camry prices up. 4Runner prices up. Look at Stellantis, Jeep. They've edged up their price of their new Wrangler. I mean, look around. Every vehicle manufacturer is creeping up their prices. Yes, price creep. After all this complaining all year long of high vehicle prices, expecting these vendors to drop their prices, they're not. And see, that's the problem, and this is what's happening in the market. People are still buying, even with big incentives. These manufacturers are trying to ride through the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows with incentives, but they're still increasing their base prices. The only way they're getting through this is with the fact that we're seeing incentives rise to a point where now about 8% of the transaction price on your average vehicle today is included with incentives. It's temporary. It comes, it goes. You know, it's relative to only what the dealer and the OEMs want to provide you. Give it to you today and they can remove it tomorrow. See, ultimately, the chronic pricing of these vehicles is not going anywhere but up. There's always ups and downs in a market short term, but long term, over 20 years, it's always up. This is what's happening in the market, and this is what continues to happen in the car market. But what adds to fuel to the fire, sadly, we're moving to this EV space and hybrids and high levels of technology, high levels of safety, and the expectation to create vehicles that have more tech, more features, big screens, all the electronics. And on top of it, they're doing it with, direct injection, turbo engines. More expensive, more complex technology means that it's going to come at a cost. But on top of it, all of these movement to this EV marketplace means that the research, the development, the mining, and the manufacturing of the batteries and electric motors and creating them safer and more productive means that to create those battery electric vehicles means that they're going to have to spend more money somewhere. Where do they come up with that money? They can't just shake a dice and, poof, wave a magic wand and hope the money shows up. The money's got to come from somewhere. So you've got to jack up prices somewhere. Well, they're trying to compete with the electric vehicle market that's coming in fast and furious. So jacking up prices on their battery electric vehicles isn't going to work. That's clearly not a business model that's sustainable when all the competition is fierce and they're fighting for the same small market share. What's happening instead is their outgoing ICE vehicles are going up. Have you not noticed that? Every one of your internal combustion vehicles, whether it's pickup trucks and turbo 6s or V8s, or whether it's Mercedes and their Turbo 4s, or whether it's Porsche, it doesn't matter on the vendor. All of these ICE vehicle prices are rising, and they will continue to rise as every single global manufacturer is looking for opportunities to transfer that money, the savings and the profits from the manufacturing of the ICE vehicles and transition that over to the EVs. So they're more competitive on EV market. That money has to come from somewhere. At the end of the day, do car prices look to be going down anytime soon? No. Sadly, this is an ongoing, ever-increasing price issue, and it's going to happen with every manufacturer. They're all playing games. They're all trying to get you in the door. You're going to see variable different levels of incentives. You're going to see different marketing schemes. You're going to see different opportunities and different ways that they're going to pitch it. You're going to see banks potentially opening up their purse strings a little wider at times with increasing levels of repos, mortgage repossessions, and defaults. It's quite clear the cost of living crisis is taking a serious toll on people, but with banks opening up restrictions, with vendors creating longer loan terms, it's absolutely enabling all of these manufacturers to create more and more expensive vehicles, and I seriously don't see prices changing anytime soon. And with all of that said, be sure to check out right there those two videos. the best vehicles of 2025 and the worst vehicles of 2025. You're definitely going to want to check those out if you've been shopping. That's your go-to. Hope to see each and every one of you all on the next one. Have a wonderful new year, and we'll see you on the flip side.